If you can play Chopin, I'll marry you,
the CEO said, her voice slicing through the lobby like a blade wrapped in silk. Laughter rippled behind her, sharp and rehearsed, as she looked at the janitor's uniform, his hands, his place. He didn't smile, didn't argue, didn't even look embarrassed. He just closed the piano lid slowly, like the sound inside mattered more than the insult. None of them noticed how the air shifted, how something unspoken settled into the marble and glass around them. By the way, where are you watching from? Tell me in the comments below. Because what was really happening beneath that joke wasn't flirtation or arrogance. It was power testing how invisible a man was willing to be. They thought the silence meant defeat. They were wrong. The man's name was Alias Moreau, and calm wasn't weakness for him. It was survival. He adjusted the strap of his cleaning cart, nodded once, and returned to work as if nothing of value had just been challenged. To anyone watching, he looked like a man who knew his place. To himself, he felt the familiar tightening in his chest, the one that came when dignity had to be swallowed for something greater. That something waited at home, asleep under a thin blanket, her sheet music folded beside her pillow. Everything he endured echoed back to her small, careful breathing. Every insult was weighed against rent, medicine, and tomorrow morning's quiet routine. He had learned long ago that pride was expensive, and silence sometimes was not. The laughter faded as executives drifted toward the elevators, heels clicking, voices already moving on. The lobby returned to its artificial calm, the piano standing mute beneath the chandelier. Elias finished mopping the marble floor where they'd stood, careful not to leave streaks. The smell of cleaner mixed with the faint memory of polished wood and old music. He worked where power never looked, behind desks, under tables, inside, corners meant to stay unseen. That was the rule of the building, unspoken but enforced daily. Upstairs was leadership, vision, money. Down here was maintenance, silence, and patience. The CEO, Maren Kessler, didn't think about him again that night. She had numbers to review, calls to make, an investor event looming that demanded perfection. To her, the joke had landed exactly where it was meant to, downward. Humor, after all, was just another tool. Elias pushed his cart toward the service corridor, the wheels rattling softly. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, uneven and tired. His reflection in the glass looked older than he felt, shoulders slightly curved, eyes too alert for a man supposedly finished with ambition. He paused near the freight elevator, listening to the distant hum of the building settling. For a moment, his fingers twitched, remembering weight that wasn't there anymore. Ivory keys. The resistance of a well-maintained piano. The way a room changed when music filled it honestly. He shook the thought away and stepped into the elevator, pressing the button with a gloved thumb. As the doors closed, the echo of laughter replayed in his mind, not loud now, but persistent. He breathed through it, slow and measured, the way he always did when the past tried to surface. At home, the apartment was small but warm, filled with the soft clutter of survival. Shoes by the door, a cracked photo frame on the shelf, a second-hand keyboard against the wall, missing one key but still playable. His daughter stirred as he entered, her brow creasing before smoothing again. He stood there longer than necessary, watching her sleep, counting breaths like a habit he couldn't break. This was why he cleaned floors that gleamed for people who never noticed. This was why insults were absorbed instead of answered. Tomorrow, the building would buzz louder. Preparations would intensify. Pressure would climb. And somewhere between service, corridors, and executive floors, between silence and sound, The space he'd been hiding would start to collapse. The freight elevator released him into the basement with a tired groan, the doors parting on concrete floors and humming pipes. The building felt different down here, less polished, more honest. Elias pushed the cart forward, the wheels echoing softly, and let the quiet settle back into his bones. Silence had weight, but it also had structure. He knew how to move inside it without breaking. Upstairs, preparations for the investor showcase had already begun, though most of the noise stayed hidden behind glass walls and closed doors. Down here, the signs came in subtler ways. Extra crates stacked near the loading bay. Security schedules taped crookedly to a bulletin board. A faint vibration through the floor when the freight deliveries arrived earlier than usual. He noticed all of it without trying. He logged his tasks on the clipboard, neat handwriting pressed small to conserve space. His shift supervisor barely glanced up, just grunted approval and waved him through. That was normal. Being forgettable was part of the uniform. Still, as he moved through the service corridors, something from the lobby clung to him, like a note left unresolved. At home, the morning routine waited patiently. He returned just before dawn, shoes placed quietly by the door, jacket hung on the same hook as always. The apartment smelled faintly of disinfectant and old coffee. He moved through it on instinct, checking the kettle, the medicine organizer, the window latch that never quite closed. Then he sat beside the bed. His daughter's eyes fluttered open as if she'd sensed him. A small smile appeared, sleepy and fragile, and he felt the familiar tightening ease just a little. He brushed hair from her forehead, careful not to wake her fully, then began preparing breakfast. Oatmeal, sliced fruit, pills measured twice. The world narrowed to manageable pieces. Later, while she practiced on the battered keyboard, he listened from the kitchen table, pretending to read notices from school. A wrong note made her pause, frown, then try again. He didn't correct her. He never did. Discovery mattered more than precision at her age. The melody stumbled forward anyway, brave in its imperfection. Before leaving for his next shift, he adjusted the scarf around her neck and checked the weather twice. She watched him with eyes too observant for 10 years old. "Big day?" she asked casually, as if sensing the hum beneath his calm. He smiled and said it was just another night. Back at the tower, the atmosphere had shifted. The lobby gleamed brighter, polished to a mirror finish. Temporary banners announced the upcoming event, all sleek fonts and confident promises. He maneuvered around floral deliveries and audiovisual equipment, unseen but necessary. People stepped around him without apology, already in a hurry. Maren Kessler crossed the lobby once, heels sharp, against stone, phone pressed to her ear. She didn't look at him, but her presence bent the space anyway. Conversations lowered as she passed. Authority had its own gravity. Elias felt it, acknowledged it, then kept moving. Gravity didn't have to be challenged to be understood. Near the piano, he paused longer than usual, adjusting the cleaning supplies with unnecessary care. The lid was closed, reflecting the chandelier above. He wiped fingerprints from the glossy surface, his movements slow, respectful. For a moment, memory tugged again, insistent this time, but he let it pass. As the shift wore on, tension threaded through the building. A technician snapped at a colleague. Security doubled near the elevators. Someone mentioned donors flying in early, voices tight with expectation. Elias absorbed it all, storing details without comment. Pressures always leaked downward first. Halfway through the night, as he replaced a light panel in a side corridor, a junior staffer stopped, nearby, watching him work. The man hesitated, then spoke, curiosity edging past caution. He said it was strange the way Elias moved, so precise, so practiced. Asked where he'd learned to handle things like that. Elias answered lightly, said, "You learn a lot when you've had to adapt." The staffer nodded, unconvinced, then left with a puzzled look. It wasn't suspicion yet, just a crack. If you're still with me, subscribe now. Because what's building inside this tower isn't just an event, it's a reckoning. When the shift finally ended, Elias signed out and headed home again, unaware that upstairs, plans were already unraveling. The silence he relied on was thinning, and soon it wouldn't hold. Morning light slid between the towers downtown, turning glass into mirrors and mirrors into masks. By the time Elias returned that evening, the building was already awake in a different way. Voices carried sharper edges, shoes moved faster. The lobby smelled of fresh flowers layered over disinfectant, an expensive attempt at calm. He rolled his cart inside and felt it immediately. The tightening, like a held breath, stretched too long. Maren Kessler stood near the reception desk, surrounded by assistants who orbited her without ever blocking her path. She spoke in clipped bursts, eyes scanning tablets, fingers slicing the air to punctuate decisions. Everything about her announced certainty, not confidence, control. When something displeased her, the room adjusted itself instinctively, chairs shifting, shoulders straightening. Authority here didn't ask permission. She paused once, irritation flashing as a banner edge curled slightly out of alignment. A facilities manager hurried to fix it, apologizing before she could speak. Maren didn't thank him. She just nodded and moved on, already on to the next concern. The building responded like a trained body. Helios waited, as he always did, until the current passed. Then he resumed polishing the stone near the elevator bank, movement steady, almost meditative. He felt her presence again as she crossed behind him, close enough that the scent of her perfume cut through the cleaner's sharpness. She didn't slow, didn't look down. To her, he was part of the floor's shine. Later, in a service corridor, he overheard fragments of conversation drifting through an open door. Investors arriving early. A live cultural segment added to the program, meant to humanize the brand. Someone laughed nervously and said it was risky. Maren's voice followed, cool and decisive, dismissing the concern. Risk, to her, was just another lever. He adjusted a supply shelf, absorbing the information without comment. Cultural segment. Live. The word echoed longer than it should have. He pushed the cart onward, past humming servers and exposed pipes, spaces designed for function rather than impression. This was where systems lived, where failure was loud and unforgiving. He understood these spaces. They told the truth. Upstairs, Maren reviewed projections in the boardroom, irritation simmering beneath her focus. The joke from the other night flickered briefly across her mind, unimportant but faintly amusing. It had landed well. Laughter was useful. It reinforced order. She didn't consider the man again, not really. People below a certain level blurred together. That was efficiency. As the evening wore on, small cracks appeared. A sound check failed twice. A lighting cue lagged, nothing catastrophic, just enough to irritate. Maren's patience thinned. She snapped once, sharply at a junior producer, then corrected herself with a breath. Control mattered, especially now. Tomorrow had to be flawless. In the break room, Elias sat with a paper cup of coffee, listening to two co-workers whisper about the event. One mentioned the CEO's obsession with perfection, the way mistakes seemed to offend her personally. The other joked that even the piano better behave. Elias kept his eyes on the steam rising from his cup. When his break ended, he passed the lobby again, Technicians clustered near the piano, discussing placement, angles, acoustics. One of them tapped a key absent-mindedly, winced at the dull sound, and shrugged. The instrument wasn't meant to be played much, just displayed, symbol over substance. Elias wiped a nearby table, the sound lingering in his ears. As he worked, he became aware of being watched. A woman from communications stood a short distance away, eyes narrowed slightly, not unkind but curious. She'd seen him the other night, seen the joke. Now she watched his hands as he moved, noting the care, the restraint. When their eyes met, she looked away quickly, unsettled by something she couldn't name. The shift pressed on. Messages moved faster. Tempers shortened. Somewhere above, plans stacked atop assumptions. Elias finished his rounds methodically, grounding himself in routine. He checked his watch once, calculating the last bus home, then pushed the thought aside. Tomorrow would require adjustments. As he headed toward the service elevator, a low vibration passed through the floor, subtle but wrong. He paused, listening, hand resting on the cart handle. It wasn't loud enough to alarm anyone yet, just a whisper of imbalance. He exhaled slowly and stepped forward. The building was speaking, and soon it would demand an answer. The vibration returned, stronger this time, rippling faintly through the lobby floor as Elias guided his cart back toward the open space. It wasn't an alarm, not yet, just a low hum like tension tightening a string. Technicians clustered near the piano again, voices clipped, eyes darting toward the elevators. Something in the schedule had shifted, and everyone could feel it. Marin Kessler arrived moments later, flanked by 2 board members and a producer who looked one breath away from panic. She surveyed the lobby with a sharp, assessing gaze, heels planted like punctuation marks. The piano caught her eye, positioned precisely where she'd ordered it. A symbol, clean, elegant, controlled. "Why is this here already?" she asked, irritation threading her voice. The producer stumbled through an explanation about acoustics and timing. Marin waved it off and stepped closer, fingertips brushing the edge of the instrument. Her reflection stared back at her from the polished surface, flawless and composed. Then she noticed Elias. He was kneeling nearby, wiping a scuff from the marble, his cart parked just out of the way. He didn't look up at first. He finished the motion, slow and deliberate, then rose to his feet. For a split second their eyes met. Something unreadable passed between them before Marin smiled. It wasn't warm, it was sharp, performative. "Well," she said, loud enough to carry, "since we're all surrounded by talent tonight." Her gaze flicked to his uniform, to his hands. "You wouldn't happen to play, would you?" The producer stiffened. A few technicians glanced at each other, uncertain. Elias felt the familiar pull in his chest, the moment where choices narrowed. He shook his head once, subtle, already turning back to his work. Marin laughed lightly. "Oh, come on, don't be shy." She placed one manicured hand on the piano lid. "I made a joke the other night. Maybe I was unfair." Her eyes glittered. "If you can play Chopin, I'll marry you." The words landed hard. Laughter followed, scattered but real, echoing off glass and stone. Someone coughed. Someone else looked down at their phone. The imbalance was unmistakable, engineered perfectly. Power dressed as humor. Elias stood still. The room waited, expecting something. Defensiveness, embarrassment, retreat. Instead, he reached forward and closed the piano lid fully, the soft thud cutting through the noise. He nodded once, not to her but to the space itself, and returned to his cart. The laughter faltered, confused by the lack of reaction. Marin's smile tightened. She'd expected more, a flinch, a plea, something to confirm the hierarchy she'd just reinforced. Instead, she felt oddly exposed, like a line had been delivered without its punch. "See?" she said, shrugging it off. "Symbols only work when they know their place." She turned away, already dismissing the moment. Elias pushed the cart forward, the wheels squeaking faintly. His hands were steady. Inside, memory surged. Concert halls, applause, the weight of expectation. But he pressed it down. Not now. Not here. The humiliation wasn't new. What followed it always mattered more. As Marin moved toward the elevators, murmurs followed in her wake. The producer exhaled shakily. A technician muttered something under his breath about bad taste. In the corner, the woman from communications watched Elias go, her brow furrowed, the scene replaying behind her eyes. He finished his task and headed toward the service corridor, heart beating slow and heavy. The building hummed louder now, systems under strain. Somewhere above, a test alarm chirped briefly, then cut off. No one reacted. Too busy, too confident. In the service elevator, Elias leaned back against the wall, eyes closed for just a moment. He counted breaths, 4 in, 4 out. The words echoed anyway, not as insult, but as challenge. Chopin, marry you. A dare, disguised as cruelty. When the doors opened, he stepped out into the corridor, the noise of the lobby muted behind concrete and steel. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A reminder. Medication refill tomorrow. He acknowledged it and slipped the device away. Above him, Marin entered her private office, irritation simmering beneath her composure. The joke hadn't landed the way she'd wanted. Something about the man's calm unsettled her, though she refused to examine it. She focused instead on schedules, on control, on the belief that nothing truly unpredictable could touch her. Down below, Elias resumed his work, invisible again by design. But the humiliation had done its work. It had drawn a line in public, and once drawn, it couldn't be erased. The building vibrated once more, stronger now, as if responding. The vibration sharpened into something everyone could feel now, not loud enough to trigger alarms, but persistent enough to unsettle concentration. Elias noticed how conversations broke mid-sentence, how people glanced down at the floor as if expecting it to speak. He finished wiping a glass panel and straightened, listening. The hum wasn't random. It had rhythm, a pattern that suggested stress rather than failure. Upstairs, the first rehearsal began. Marin stood near the back of the executive hall, arms folded, eyes narrowed as the lighting sequence rolled out of sync with the audio. The producer whispered apologies, fingers flying over a tablet. Investors would arrive within hours. There was no margin left. Perfection wasn't optional, it was survival. "Fix it," she said quietly, which was worse than shouting. Technicians scrambled. A second attempt fared no better. The piano cue came early, the spotlight lagged, and the sound system spat a brief screech before cutting out entirely. The room went still. Someone swore under their breath. Marin closed her eyes for a second, then opened them, expression reset into something dangerously calm. Down below, Elias felt the cut in sound like a physical absence. He was in a maintenance alcove replacing a filter, hands already dirty, mind already mapping possibilities. He'd heard that screech before years ago, in rooms built for music rather than money. It wasn't the instrument, it was the system feeding it. A junior tech hurried past, muttering into a headset. Elias stepped aside automatically, then hesitated. He watched the man disappear into the corridor leading upstairs, shoulders tight, breathing shallow. The building was bleeding tension. He finished the filter change, logged it, and pushed his cart forward. As he moved, he replayed the sound in his head, isolating it, testing theories against memory. Old habits surfaced easily when needed. He didn't fight them. Near the service stairs, the communications woman stood again, phone pressed to her ear, voice low and urgent. When she saw him, she paused, eyes flicking to his hands, then back to his face. There was something almost pleading there, though she said nothing. He nodded politely and passed, the moment lingering like an unanswered question. In the executive hall, the rehearsal collapsed completely. The system froze, lights locked in an unflattering glare, the piano mic dead. Marin's patience snapped. She dismissed the room with a sharp gesture, ordering a full reset and an emergency review. People scattered, fear sharpening their movements. "This cannot happen tomorrow," she said to no one in particular. But everyone heard it. As the hall emptied, the piano sat alone under the lights, immaculate and useless. Marin stared at it for a long beat, jaw tight. The image of the janitor closing its lid surfaced unbidden. She pushed it away, irritated at herself for the distraction. Below, Elias reached the end of his shift, but didn't clock out immediately. He lingered near the control panels that governed environmental systems, pretending to check a reading. The hum had shifted again, deepening. If left alone, it would escalate. Not catastrophically, but publicly, embarrassingly. His phone buzzed. A message from home. A reminder about tomorrow's appointment highlighted twice. He exhaled slowly. Timing was never kind. He could leave. That was the rule. Stay invisible. Let power fix its own mess with money and consultants. He'd done that for years. Tonight felt different. The insult from the lobby echoed again. Not raw now, but resolved into something steadier. Not anger, resolve. A voice drifted down the stairwell, raised, strained. Someone arguing with the system, blaming equipment, blaming time. Elias closed his eyes, briefly, then made a decision so quiet it barely registered as one. He pushed his cart toward the stairwell. If you're still watching, subscribe now, because from this point on, silence stops being safe, and the truth doesn't stay hidden much longer. He paused at the bottom step, listening one last time to the building's pulse. It answered, predictably. He knew exactly where to start. And above him, the polished world waited, unaware that the man it had just mocked was about to become unavoidable. Elias took the stairs two at a time, not rushing but moving with intent, the way someone does when they already knows the end of the path. The sounds grew clearer as he climbed, raised voices, hurried footsteps, the hollow echo of frustration bouncing off walls designed to impress rather than function. By the time he reached the service landing outside the executive hall, the hum had sharpened into a thin, almost painful frequency. The door was ajar. Inside, half a dozen technicians hovered around a portable console, cables snaking across the floor like veins pulled too tight. One of them struck the side of a speaker in irritation. Another scrolled through diagnostics that clearly weren't telling him what he wanted to see. "It's not responding," someone said. "It should have auto-balanced." Another snapped back. Well, it didn't. Elias stayed just outside the doorway at first, unseen, watching the pattern unfold. Panic always followed the same shape. People moved faster, thought narrower, blamed louder. He listened to the rhythm of the system underneath it all, filtering the noise away until only the problem remained. A feedback loop. Minor, fixable, but only if someone stopped trying to overpower it. Marin entered then, her presence cutting through the chaos like a blade. The room straightened instinctively. She surveyed the scene, eyes flicking from console to piano to frozen lighting rig. "How long?" she asked. No one answered. Immediately. That told her everything she needed to know. Her jaw tightened. Elias stepped forward before he could reconsider. Not into the center of the room, just close enough to be heard. "It's not the instrument," he said calmly. "It's the routing." Every head turned. For a second, no one spoke. Then one of the technicians scoffed, sharp and dismissive. "We've checked that." Elias didn't argue. He nodded toward the console instead. "The balance is compensating for a delay that isn't there anymore. It's feeding back on itself." The words landed differently than he expected. Not disbelief, curiosity. One technician frowned and leaned closer to the screen, scrolling again, slower this time. Marin studied Elias openly now, irritation warring with calculation. "And you know this how?" she asked. He met her gaze without flinching. "Because I've heard it before." That was it. Not a reveal, not a defense, just a fact. The communications woman slipped, in behind Marin, eyes flicking between them. She looked almost relieved, like something she'd suspected was finally taking shape. "Show us," Marin said after a beat. It wasn't permission. It was a test. Elias moved closer to the console, careful not to displace anyone. He didn't touch anything yet. He listened again, head tilted slightly, as if the system itself were speaking to him. Then he reached out and adjusted one setting, just one, barely perceptible. The hum softened immediately. The room stilled. "Run it," he said quietly. They did. The sound returned, cleaner now, the screech gone, the balance restored. A technician let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Someone laughed once, short and disbelieving. Marin said nothing. She watched the piano cue activate smoothly, the spotlight snapping into place exactly on time. Control restored, but not by her. "Who are you?" she asked finally. Elias straightened, wiping his hands on a cloth out of habit. "Maintenance," he said. It wasn't a lie, just incomplete. Her eyes narrowed. She recognized deflection when she saw it. That wasn't maintenance-level knowledge. He shrugged lightly. "I pay attention." The explanation didn't satisfy her, but the result did, for now. She turned to the technicians, issuing clipped instructions, then paused again, eyes returning to him. "Stay," she said, "until tomorrow." It wasn't a request. Elias hesitated, thinking of home, of the appointment, of the careful balance he maintained. Then he nodded once. "All right." As the room emptied, the communications woman lingered. She looked at him with something like awe mixed with guilt. "I knew there was more," she said quietly. "The way you move, it's not just cleaning." He gave a small, tired smile. "People see what they expect." She watched him go, the pieces clicking together too late to stop what was coming. Marin returned to her office, unsettled, despite the fix. The janitor's calm replayed in her mind, his certainty without arrogance. It bothered her more than the failure had. Power was supposed to be exclusive, predictable. Below, Elias leaned against the wall for a moment, letting the adrenaline fade. His hands trembled slightly now that no one was watching. He clenched them, grounding himself. The line had been crossed. Tomorrow, there would be witnesses. The hallway outside the executive hall emptied slowly, like a tide pulling back with reluctance. Elias stayed where he was, shoulder against the cool wall, breathing evening out. The building's hum had softened, almost grateful, but the tension hadn't left. It had only changed shape. Marin's office door closed with a muted click down the corridor. Through the glass, silhouettes moved, assistants arriving, tablets raised, voices low but urgent. The machine of authority was already recalibrating, absorbing the disruption, pretending it had always been part of the plan. Someone cleared their throat nearby. Elias turned to see one of the senior technicians lingering, hands shoved into his pockets. "That adjustment you made," the man said, not quite meeting his eyes. "Where'd you learn that?" Elias considered the question, then answered honestly without explaining. "A long time ago." The technician nodded, as if that was enough, then hesitated. "You should be upstairs tomorrow, during the event." "I was told to stay," Elias said simply. "Good," the man replied, relief flickering across his face. "Good." Footsteps echoed again. The communications woman approached, slower this time, her earlier urgency replaced by something heavier. "She's shaken," she said quietly, nodding toward the office. "She doesn't like surprises." "No one does," Elias replied. She studied him, eyes sharp but kinder than before. "You didn't have to step in." "I know. Then why did you?" He thought of the of the way small problems became public disasters when ignored. He thought of his daughter's careful breathing, of appointments circled on calendars that didn't bend for anyone's pride. "Because it was already breaking," he said. She let out a slow breath. "Tomorrow's going to be intense." "It already is," he said, glancing toward the hall. She smiled faintly at that, then grew serious again. "Be careful." After she left, Elias checked his phone, a missed call. A voicemail he didn't open yet. He slid the phone back into his pocket and headed for the service elevator. Staying meant rearranging everything. Staying meant exposure. But leaving now would mean abandoning a moment that had already begun to move without him. The elevator ride down felt longer than usual. Each floor passed with a soft chime, marking distance not just in height but in consequence. By the time the doors opened, he'd made peace with the choice. Not because it was easy, because it was necessary. In the basement, he stored his cart and signed back in under a temporary extension. The supervisor barely glanced at the form, distracted by a radio crackling with updates. "You're on standby," the man muttered. "Don't wander." Elias nodded. Wandering had never been his problem. He found a quiet corner near the building systems, a place where sound traveled honestly. He listened again, confirming the fix held. It did, for now. Tomorrow, under pressure, it would be tested harder. He'd need to be close. Above, Marin paced her office, heels clicking a sharp rhythm against the floor. She replayed the scene despite herself. The way the janitor had spoken, the confidence without deference. It irritated her, it intrigued her. Most of all, it unsettled the narrative she relied on to keep order intact. "Find out who he is," she told an assistant, voice controlled. "Quietly." "Yes," the assistant replied, already typing. Marin turned toward the window, the city spread below like a promise she'd already kept. Power had rules. Tonight, one had been bent. She intended to understand why. Back in the service corridor, Elias finally listened to the voicemail. His daughter's voice, soft but steady, telling him she'd finished practicing and saved him dinner. He closed his eyes briefly, letting the sound anchor him. "I'll be home late," he murmured, though she couldn't hear it yet. The night stretched on, restless. People came and went, nerves fraying as the hours slipped closer to morning. Each minor hiccup fed the larger unease. And through it all, Elias remained where power rarely looked, adjusting, listening, waiting. By dawn, the line between invisible and indispensable had thinned to almost nothing. and everyone could feel it. Morning arrived without ceremony, gray light seeping through the high windows and settling over the lobby like a held breath. Elias hadn't slept. He'd rested in fragments, leaning back against a chair in the systems room, eyes closed while his mind stayed alert. When the first catering carts rolled in and the security shift changed over, he straightened, already present before anyone noticed him. The building woke fast. By mid-morning, the lobby transformed into something almost theatrical. Floral arrangements were repositioned by the inch. Screens flickered with branded visuals, voices layered over one another in practiced urgency. Elias moved through it all quietly, badge clipped, hand steady, staying just outside the center of things. He felt the system strain again, subtle but familiar. Pressure always found its weak points. He checked the control panel once more. The routing still held, but only barely. Under full load, it would drift. He adjusted a backup path, temporary and invisible, then stepped away. No announcement, no credit. Just prevention. From the corner of his vision, he noticed Maren enter the lobby. She looked immaculate, composed, but there was a sharpness to her focus now, an edge that hadn't been there before. Her gaze swept the room differently, less assured, as if measuring variables she'd previously ignored. When her eyes landed on him, they lingered a fraction too long. She walked over. "Everything stable?" she asked, voice neutral, professional. No trace of mockery now. "For the moment," Elias replied. She studied his face, searching for something, ego, fear, leverage. Finding none unsettled her more than defiance ever would have. "Stay close," she said. Again, not a request. He inclined his head. "I am." As she moved on, a junior assistant sidled up to him, whispering, "They added a live performance slot. Last-minute decision." The assistant swallowed. "It's ambitious." Elias nodded once. Ambitious was one word for it. Risky was another. The hours compressed as arrivals began. Investors stepped through the doors in tailored confidence, conversations humming with expectation. Cameras were tested, smiles practiced. The piano sat at the center of it all, polished to a flawless sheen, waiting. Elias felt the old weight return, heavier now. Not memory, responsibility. He positioned himself near the side controls, close enough to intervene without being obvious. This was the edge he'd been living on since the joke. The moment where silence stopped protecting anyone. The system hiccuped. It was small, almost imperceptible. A flicker in the audio feed, a half-second delay. Elias adjusted immediately, fingers precise. The hum softened again. No one noticed, except Maren. She turned sharply, eyes locking on him from across the room. Recognition flickered there, not of his past, of his importance. The program advanced. Speeches landed cleanly. Applause followed on cue. Confidence crept back into the space, false but comforting. Then came the transition. Lights dimmed. A spotlight found the piano. This was the point of no return. The system surged under the load. Elias felt it, before he saw it. His fingers hovered, ready. He could stabilize it again, maybe keep the illusion intact. Or... A cable failed. The sound cut out entirely. A ripple of confusion spread through the audience. Heads turned. Murmurs rose. The spotlight stayed fixed on the piano, now silent and accusing. Somewhere, someone cursed softly. Maren stepped forward instinctively, hand raised, smile ready to reassure. But there was nothing to say yet. No fix incoming. The illusion cracked wide open. Elias moved. He didn't rush. He walked into the light calmly, as if he belonged there, and knelt by the piano. The room stilled, confusion sharpening into attention. He adjusted the failed connection, but he didn't stand back up. Instead, he sat. A murmur swept the crowd. Maren froze where she was. Elias placed his hands on the keys. If you've made it this far, subscribe now, because what happens next isn't just a reveal. It's the moment everything changes. He didn't look at anyone. He didn't need to. The first notes filled the space, rich and unamplified, carrying farther than anyone expected. The room fell silent, breath caught collectively. Chopin rose into the air, undeniable. In that moment, the janitor disappeared, and the truth, long buried, finally took the stage. The sound held the room in a way technology never could. Elias let the opening measures settle, unhurried, allowing the space to adjust to honesty. The piano responded beneath his hands, warmer than he remembered, imperfect but willing. Each note carried without strain, slipping past glass and steel, reaching people who hadn't expected to feel anything tonight. Investors shifted in their seats. Phones lowered. Conversations died mid-thought. The spotlight, once accusatory, softened into something reverent. No one moved to stop him. No one could. Maren stood frozen at the edge of the light, her rehearsed reassurance dissolving before it formed. This wasn't damage control, this was exposure. The room that had laughed at her joke now listened to the answer she hadn't believed would come. Elias played with restraint, not performing for applause but for clarity. Chopin unfolded with quiet authority, every phrase deliberate, every pause intentional. It wasn't flashy, it was honest. And honesty, it turned out, commanded attention better than power ever had. The communications woman felt tears sting unexpectedly and didn't bother hiding them. A technician leaned against the wall, stunned, shaking his head slowly. Somewhere near the back, a board member whispered a name, one he'd read years ago on a program, long before this building existed. The whisper spread, uncertain at first, then steadier. Maren heard it. Her breath caught. She stepped closer without realizing it, eyes searching Elias's face for confirmation, for denial, for anything that would make sense of the collapse happening in real time. The man she'd mocked sat composed, unbothered by the weight of the room, fingers moving with the ease of someone returning home. Memory struck her then, sharp and unwelcome. A gala years ago, a concert hall, a pianist whose performance had left her unsettled because she hadn't been able to buy her way into understanding it. She'd dismissed it as sentimentality. Now she recognized the same presence. The piece reached its turning point, swelling before easing back, tension resolving into something gentler. Elias breathed with it, shoulders relaxed, expression unchanged. He wasn't proving anything. He was simply speaking a language the room had forgotten how to hear. When the final note faded, silence followed. Not awkward, not confused, but full. No one rushed to fill it. The building itself seemed to hold still. Then applause began. Not the polite kind, not the scheduled kind. It rose unevenly at first, then gathered force, spreading until the sound pressed in from every direction. Elias remained seated, hands resting lightly on the keys, eyes lowered. Maren stepped forward into the light, applause crashing around her. She raised a hand slowly and the room responded, volume tapering until only a few claps echoed before stopping entirely. Control returned, but not the way she was used to wielding it. She looked at Elias, really looked at him, seeing not a role, but a man she'd misjudged publicly. The imbalance she'd engineered had inverted, witnessed by everyone who mattered. Her voice, when she spoke, was quieter than anyone expected. "You should have told us," she said. Elias met her gaze calmly. "You didn't ask." A murmur rippled through the crowd, not unkind, not hostile, recognition. The truth had settled, and it wasn't going anywhere. Marin swallowed. She nodded once, accepting the correction without argument. "Who are you?" she asked again. The question stripped of challenge now, heavy with consequence. He stood then, stepping away from the piano, posture easy. "Someone who cleans. Floors," he said. A pause. "And someone who used to play." The simplicity landed harder than any resume could have. Security shifted uncertainly. An assistant glanced at Marin, waiting for direction. The investors watched closely. Interest sharpened into something more than profit. This was unscripted. This was real. Marin turned to the room, drawing a breath. "There will be a brief recess," she said, steady again, but changed. "Thank you for your patience." People rose slowly, conversations buzzing, eyes following Elias as he moved back toward the side of the room. He felt the weight now, not fear, but inevitability. The line had been crossed in full view. As the crowd dispersed, Marin remained where she was, staring at the piano. The joke she'd made echoed in her mind, stripped of humor, exposed as cruelty. She understood, finally, what it had cost her. Elias stopped near the service corridor, the familiar edge between worlds. The building hummed differently now, balanced in a way it hadn't been before. He leaned against the wall, heart steady, knowing this wasn't the end. It was the reckoning's beginning. The recess stretched longer than announced, not because anyone delayed it, but because no one quite knew how to resume. Conversations gathered in clusters, low and urgent, eyes returning again and again to the piano, and the man standing beside the service corridor like he'd always belonged there. Elias stayed still, letting the noise wash past him, hands loose at his sides, heart steady in a way that surprised him. Marin finally broke from the knot of executives and approached alone. Without the spotlight, without an audience poised for approval, she looked different. Not smaller, stripped. Power without armor was quieter. "I owe you an apology," she said, stopping a few feet away. He inclined his head slightly, neither accepting nor rejecting it. "You owe the room honesty," he replied. "That's more important." She absorbed that, jaw tightening once before easing. "You're right." Behind her, investors watched openly now, curiosity replacing skepticism. The narrative had shifted, and they were recalibrating fast. Marin turned back to them, posture straightening, voice carrying without force. "The performance you just witnessed wasn't planned," she said, "but it was real, and it represents something this company claims to value." She paused, then added, "Skill doesn't disappear because someone steps away from status." The words cost her. It showed, but she didn't retreat from them. A ripple moved through the group, approval mixed with surprise. One investor nodded thoughtfully. Another smiled faintly, impressed less by the music than by the humility on display. Marin glanced back at Elias. Something like gratitude flickering there, quickly masked by resolve. She gestured toward the piano. "Would you play one more?" The request landed differently this time. No joke, no leverage, just acknowledgement. Elias considered it, thinking of home, of the thin line he'd walked for years. Then he nodded once and returned to the bench. He didn't choose Chopin again. This time, the piece was simpler, quieter, almost intimate. It filled the space without demanding it, reminding everyone that mastery didn't always announce itself loudly. When he finished, the applause came softer, more respectful. The investors approached him now, introductions offered, questions measured and sincere. He answered politely but briefly, careful not to be drawn into a world that still wasn't his. Marin watched from a distance, noting how he deflected attention without arrogance. That, more than anything, confirmed what she'd missed before. Power had taught her to recognize hunger. Elias had none. As the event resumed in a new shape, quieter but steadier, Elias stepped back again, reclaiming the edge where he was most comfortable. The building hummed evenly now. Systems aligned, pressure redistributed. The crisis had passed, but the consequences were only beginning. Later, as the last guests filtered out, Marin approached him one final time. "I'd like to make you an offer," she said carefully. He met her gaze, already knowing what it would be. "I'm listening." "Consulting," she continued. "On our cultural initiatives, systems, training, whatever you choose, on your terms." He thought of the cart in the basement, of the routines that had kept his life balanced. He thought of his daughter, of mornings and music and the cost of being seen. "I'll consider it," he said. Nothing more. She nodded, accepting the boundary. "That's fair." They stood in silence for a moment, the piano between them like a witness. The imbalance that had once defined their interaction was gone, replaced by something more level, more honest. As Elias headed toward the service elevator, applause echoing faintly in memory, he checked his phone. A new message waited. Home. He smiled, small and private, and quickened his pace. The doors closed behind him, carrying him back to the spaces he knew best. But the building felt different now, less rigid, as if it, too, had learned something. Power had been challenged. Dignity restored. And for the first time in a long while, Elias felt seen without being claimed. The building exhaled as the last guests departed, the echo of applause replaced by the low murmur of cleanup and quiet recalibration. Elias stepped out of the service elevator into the basement, the familiar smell of concrete and metal grounding him again. He signed out slowly, pen pressing harder than usual, as if anchoring the moment to something tangible. Above him, conversations continued, but down here, the truth settled into stillness. Marin remained upstairs long after the lights dimmed, seated alone in the boardroom with a single file open on the table. It wasn't thick. It didn't need to be. Programs, reviews, a career that had once commanded standing ovations. She read without blinking, recognition tightening in her chest. The joke replayed again, stripped of its audience, naked in its cruelty. Power had never challenged her morality before. Tonight, it had. She closed the file and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. Apologies were easy and private. Accountability was not. Tomorrow's headlines would praise innovation and authenticity. None of them would mention her words. But she would. She knew now that silence could be violence when wielded by authority. Downstairs, Elias retrieved his cart, hands moving automatically as he restored order to the spaces others ignored. A technician passed him and nodded with open respect. No joke, no condescension, just acknowledgement. It felt heavier than applause, more enduring. He returned the nod and continued on, refusing to let it alter his posture. The communications woman caught up to him near the loading bay. "She's issuing a statement," she said quietly, "about culture, about responsibility." He listened without comment, stacking supplies with careful precision. "She's naming the moment," the woman added. "Not you, herself." Elias paused, considering. "That matters," he said finally. She smiled, relief softening her shoulders. "It does." When he stepped outside, the night air felt sharper, cleaner. The city stretched ahead, indifferent and alive. He boarded the bus with the same coins he always used, choosing the same seat by the window. No one recognized him. That, too, felt right. Vindication didn't require spectacle to endure. At home, the apartment light glowed softly. His daughter was awake, wrapped in a blanket on the couch, eyes bright despite the late hour. She looked up as he entered, searching his face for answers he hadn't planned to give yet. "Did it go okay?" she asked. He set his jacket down and sat beside her, drawing her close. "It did," he said. "Better than okay." She nodded, satisfied, then rested her head against his shoulder. The keyboard waited in the corner, one missing key still taped carefully in place. He pressed a few notes softly, smiling at the familiar resistance, the imperfect sound. The next morning, the tower felt altered. Not transformed, aware. People greeted him by name, doors held open. Conversations paused when he passed, not to stare, but to make room. He returned to work without ceremony, resuming tasks that still needed doing. Floors didn't clean themselves. Systems still needed listening ears. Marin crossed the lobby mid-morning and stopped when she saw him. There were no assistants this time, no audience. Just two people occupying the same space honestly. "I meant what I said," she told him, "about the offer, but more than that." She hesitated. "I'm sorry." He met her gaze steadily. "I know," he replied. She nodded once, accepting that some wounds didn't need reopening to heal. As she walked away, the piano caught the light again. No longer a symbol of control, but of balance. Elias pushed his cart forward, the wheels humming softly. The building responded in kind, steady and aligned. Justice hadn't been loud. It hadn't been punitive. It had been precise. And that was enough. Morning settled gently into the apartment, sunlight touching the edges of furniture worn smooth by time. Elias stood at the stove, stirring oatmeal while listening to the quiet rhythm of the place he'd built piece by piece. The night before hadn't followed him home like a storm. It had dissolved somewhere between the bus ride and the familiar turn of his key, leaving only clarity behind. His daughter sat at the small table, feet swinging, sheet music spread beside her bowl. She hummed softly, distracted, safe. He watched her for a moment longer than necessary, committing the ordinary to memory. This was the victory that mattered. Not applause, not recognition, continuity. Later, after walking her to school, he returned to the tower for one last shift before his schedule changed. The lobby greeted him differently now, not reverent, just aware. People moved with the same urgency, but their eyes met his without sliding away. He pushed his cart forward, the wheels echoing gently across marble that had witnessed its own correction. The piano stood where it always had, lid closed, polished, no longer a joke waiting to be made. He paused beside it, not touching, just acknowledging. Some things didn't need repetition to remain true. Upstairs, Marin finalized her statement, reading it aloud once before sending it out. The words were measured, careful, and real. She didn't mention names. She didn't soften responsibility. Power, she'd learned, wasn't proven by control, but by correction. When she finished, she sat back and exhaled, the silence no longer threatening. Elias finished his rounds and returned his cart to storage. The supervisor approached, awkward but sincere, explaining the revised schedule, the flexibility added without being asked. Elias listened, nodded, accepted what aligned and declined what didn't. Boundaries mattered more now. On the way out, the communications woman waved, smiling without hesitation. The technician who'd scoffed days earlier offered a quiet thanks. None of it felt excessive. None of it felt owed. It simply existed. He stepped outside into the city's flow, choosing the bus again despite offers that would come later. Familiarity grounded him. At home, The keyboard waited. That evening, he sat beside his daughter and listened as she played, missing key and all. She stumbled, corrected herself, and kept going. He didn't interrupt. He never would. As the notes filled the room, imperfect and sincere, he felt something settle fully at last. The past hadn't been erased. It had been integrated. Skill didn't vanish when hidden. Dignity didn't weaken when deferred. They waited. The world outside would continue misjudging people who worked quietly, who carried mastery without display. But sometimes, just sometimes, truth surfaced exactly where it was dismissed. And when it didn't ask permission. That was the lesson the building learned. That was the lesson he carried forward. Not as armor, but as balance. If this story stayed with you, ask me for the next story title and use this CTA. Subscribe, and don't miss our next story. Wrong seat, wrong day, gentlemen. Single dad defended stranger, his identity revealed. Trust me, you'll feel it. And tell me in the comments, what injustice should we tackle next?